welcome back. This is Mel. We're back at the conference, and we're with Chris and Heather from Texas, and they have driven 14 hours, from what I understand, to get here, which is crazy. And how many kids did you guys bring?
We brought 5.
5. Oh my gosh. I didn't even ask you what kind of vehicle you have, but well, that doesn't really matter. But that's some dedication. So anyway, we've all just been having a lot of interesting conversations and community here. And so we're just pulling people out and having random conversations. And so we were just having kind of a pre-interview conversation. At some point I had to cut Heather off and say, stop. And I'm sure she thought like, oh no, okay, yeah, we'll get to the interview. I was like, no, I want to record this because the conversations are just so darn good. You guys have missed, I don't know how much, and I don't know if we're going to be able to regather that. But I guess we'll kind of get back into it, sort of like, I don't know if I want to go back to how did you get into Mike's stuff, but it's, we were kind of talking about how this material is very, very good for Christian Middle Earth and how it just kind of, and Mike was able to really, like you're saying, communicate really well with the people. There's a lot of people that Mike, like has always talked about, they're out in the pew and they're sitting there and they're not getting fed the depth of what they're wanting to get fed. And that Mike was somehow able to fill that niche. And he's not making stuff up, but he's making the story make a whole lot more sense. And we were just talking with Anthony about like his Divine Council, like D&D style game, and how this totally feeds into Christian Middle Earth, you know? I guess, how do you guys feel like you relate to this? You know, that's kind of like one of the things, like, I guess it's like, where do you feel like you fit in the spectrum of nerditery within this, if I can?
I would say we're right in the middle. Well,
in the middle,
enmeshed in the nerdery, I guess is a great.
Yeah, I would say we're like off the charts on the nerd end, but in the middle of the nerds, probably, which most people wouldn't expect.
But yeah, I think to a large degree, as you said, Heiser's material did so much. It did so much for us personally, but I think the way we kind of describe it, at least I describe it, is that he fills in the backstory almost, or fills in the details and the holes in the narrative that you knew were there and you couldn't connect all the main story that, or the overwhelming theme of Christ and the way God is working through us was in there, but he brought it to life in color and to a depth that was different than.
What was like the one, let's say, story or factoid or whatever thing that was kind of like a sort of a defining moment for you that kind of like, wow, this is really opening up some things. There's so much I didn't really know about that story. Like same question for both of you, but I'm sure you both have maybe similar but different answers.
I can start with that one. Early on, we go back and think about when we were introduced to Heiser's material, and it was probably around 2010 or 2011 through a friend of mine. And I know the kind of pivotal moment for me was when I started listening to his podcast, The Naked Bible. And he'd already had, several episodes well into it. In fact, the pivotal moment for me was when he did his study on the book of Acts, which I think was one of his first ones, or first series, at least in the book of the Bible. And the depth of understanding that he brought to locations and the cosmic geography aspect and just the Old Testament themes that were running throughout the book of Acts, and how comments that were being made held a context in the Old Testament to, the Israelite or even the Gentile of that time would have significant meaning and weight. And I'd read the book of Acts several times, right? And not one of my favorite, but I walked away from that like completely amazed at the connections that he made between the Old and New Testament. And again, his information brought the story to life and filled in the details that made it not just a story, but more like an epic, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, man, just sitting here, there have been 25 different moments that have gone through my head just while he's talking that I'm just like, man, that was transformational. And that was transformational. The first one obviously was just my first exposure to Heiser was reading through The Unseen Realm. And so I didn't start with anything else. I just started chapter 1 of Unseen Realm and really resonated even with how he described growing up and his own kind of just re-looking at scripture, but then resonated the whole way through with just every single thing. I was like, yes, that's what it's always seemed like, but I've never had any context for that. And going back to something you said, we were talking about earlier about just people in Middle Earth starving. I went to a Christian university as basically a theology major. Technically it was philosophy, but philosophy at a Christian university is basically the same thing. And I'd still been starving through that whole time. You know, you are dying to get meat. And Heiser was the first time that I felt like I was actually spiritually fed ever. And not that I hadn't listened to good people before or learned a lot about the Bible, but I would say two things really stick out as far as that moment. Sorry, my mind's going in too many different directions.
It's difficult when you got to choose just one.
It is just one, but had to, and then they just left. One of them would have been the very first of the Naked Bible podcast, going through how to study the Bible. And I thought that I was like relatively well-versed in the Bible, having memorized. And I mean, I'd been immersed in scripture my whole life, but then going through that little section as one of the first episode, series that he ever did on the Naked Bible podcast. And I was just like floored. Like, I don't know how to study any of this. And then the other one, really, because I was a philosophy major at a Christian university, I'd had so many people who walked away from the faith specifically because they thought the God of the Old Testament was just evil. And they couldn't reconcile this genocidal maniac with this pot smoking hippie Jesus in the New Testament. And Heiser just destroys all of that, but he does it in like the best, gentle way possible, that we believe this about God because we don't understand what the text is saying at all. And actually understanding the conquest and the backdrop and how the Israelites would have seen that, but also just the cosmic geography of what's happening there was completely and utterly transformational in just how I read the Bible in general, but also how I engage the world as far as who God is and the hope that we have in actually relating to a God who is infinitely loving.
That's awesome. I think I relate to your idea of struggling with, like, I'm told God is kind and I'm told that Jesus is a reflection of God. Then why did God, during like Joshua's conquest and even in David, further cleansing the land, why that? Like, how is the same? And then when Mike kind of explained that, I was like, that makes so much sense. But it's like, admittedly, you kind of like, when you realize it, you see it and it's there in the narrative, you're kind of like, this seems kind of crazy though. Yeah. This whole like Genesis 6 and like the divine beings mating with women and creating this like hybrid offspring. Cause like we just can't relate to that now, like here in 21st century, even in the last, several hundred years, there's just nothing in recorded history that we know of that really relates to that. But I totally identify with you on that. Something else you said that I was wondering, because I know a lot of us go back to Mike. We're always talking about Mike because Mike, for a lot of us, was kind of this red pill moment. Because I want to ask you guys, maybe who else are you listening to or who else are you getting fed by? Because I want to also give other people, like, it's not all about come to Mike, because I want people to think that it's like he's like this solitary prophet of arbiter of like truth and stuff, because there's so many examples of religions out there that we can say went to one man and it just kind of ended up poorly. But I think for a lot of us, Mike was just the guy that connected all the dots. Like, he didn't come up with anything new. That's what he says. The dirty little secret is Mike never had an original thought. He's just combining all the ideas cohesively. And there's been a lot of like podcasts and some other theologians that have kind of made comments in recent history, just kind of said they don't agree with him on this or that. And I get it. I don't expect all of us to agree wholehearted, like not just carte blanche with everything he says. But my question back to them would be, well, show us a better model. Show us a better story that connects the dots better. Are you guys getting fed with anybody else, or is there any other kind of like people you're listening to or things you're reading that are kind of like really rounding out the knowledge set that have really added to your knowledge base?
I'll take that one first. It's kind of a sensitive subject, I think, right now with my wife, but yes, I think it's important to be diverse, obviously, in what you study and how the material you look at. I would say structurally, philosophically, one of the things that Heiser's material did, at least for me, was introduce me to the realm of the academic papers and different viewpoints from that standpoint. So a lot of the time I've spent since Mike's passage is to go back through the material and look at his source material and read the source material of where his ideas come from. Because I want to hear directly from the people that he's quoting. And also what I loved about his material was he didn't just present his point of view. He always generally presented 2 or 3 other presentations or interpretations of those things. And he would give you the leading ones. And so I think it's important to go back to those as well to fully flesh out truth from untruth, honestly. And as you said, you can't just take things as they're presented, even from Heiser, even though he's a trusted source. It's important to understand the arguments for and against. So that's been part of what I've been trying to do lately. Today we talked about Bates and the book on pistis. That was a book that we read as a family, or at least I read and went through as a family, talked about it. It was funny to listen to our kids talk for 2 months, saying pistis every other word about everything they're doing, loyalty. But that aspect of things is branching out from his tree or his information database, I think is important. Those aren't specific authors or specific people, but that's just in general. Like
maybe he was a gateway drug.
He was.
Into the other things.
Absolutely. And I'm often hesitant, I think, to present material. Well, Heiser says this, right? Yeah. Because that's a turnoff for a good majority of people. Yeah. And honestly, I despise that when people do that to me, right? Because you're just listening to one person, whether that be N.T. Wright or anybody that's on the leading edge of academic information or controversial at the moment. But I think it's important for all of us to read a diverse set of material, both that supports what we think, but also challenges us. I think for us as a family, Ron Johnson's material, again, not so far off the Heiser tree, but the way he presents materials and openly disagrees with a lot of what Heiser said, I think is important to us. His daily dose of the Bible has been instrumental for us as a family to go through as a devotional in the mornings. As we're teaching our kids to look at Scripture through an Old Testament or an ancient Israelite perspective, and hopefully have that mindset or that foundation instilled in our children. So that's been big for us recently.
What about you? What are your thoughts?
That's been tough for me. Yeah. I have an extremely diverse background and still consume a massive amount of information. Like Chris said, the things that Ron Johnson has done have been probably the closest I can say to still feeding that desire. Joel Matamale has put out a lot of good stuff. And then like Justin Bass and the other people that have been on either the Naked Bible podcast or honestly that Mike has introduced us to through something else. And there are some other people, but nothing with the same weight as what Heiser has done.
There was we were just having a conversation. Oh, it was with you guys and Ron in there, and Mike and Ron's work kind of go up to, let's say, Christ. It's the work, all the work leading up to Christ, and then I had read a buddy of mine at work had turned me on to a podcast. I think the podcast is Voxology, and they were interviewing Nijay Gupta, and he said, "Hey, you need to check out this about." and so Nietzsche had just dropped a book called Strange Religion. But the interesting thing is that Nietzsche took it, because Nietzsche apparently specialized in Paul, I believe, and he did essentially the book is essentially kind of a divine counsel worldview, but not from the Judeo-Christian mindset, but it's from the Roman, it's the other gods. It's outside the Bible. Yeah. And so the book is essentially how the early Christians were so upside down. They were so reverse or inverse of what they were, but it still highly interacted with the concept of, back in that time, other gods were understood and they were geographically known. They were known like, in this country, in this city, this is our God. And this is the hierarchy, and there's these lesser gods. And if you need luck, or if you need rain, or if you need money, or if you need, fertility, these are the different gods you go to for these different things. And there's an idol, but they were not dumb in the sense that they thought it's just this wooden or stone or clay thing that was made. It was like they felt like the God had been at some point localized somehow in that thing, to that point, I remember back in, 2018, I went with Mike and some of the other people to Israel on an Israel trip.
I was 9 months pregnant, and I was so sad that I couldn't go.
It was an awesome trip.
It's like, I'll go in the next one, and it never happened.
Oh, it was so cool. And so the coolest part for me was when we went up to Caesarea Philippi. And we're standing, and there's a huge rock, and there's this big alcove dug into the rock, and there's this river that just looks like, and maybe I didn't search well enough, but it just looks like it comes out of the rock. This really, I don't know how wide it was. It seemed like it was maybe 40 feet wide and probably 5-6 feet deep. It was very clear, but it was rushing water. And Mike is explaining, this was Pan's Grotto. This was what the gates of hell, this is at that time, the people understood that when people died, this is where their soul went, and they were to pay a coin. They put the coin on the eyes or the mouth or something like that. And that was the tax for Pan to take them into the netherworld. And these were known as the gates of Hades, And so when Jesus said, Peter, who do you say that I am? And he says, yes, you're right. You didn't know this. My Father showed it to you. And I say, your name is Peter. You're the rock. And upon this rock, the gates of hell will not. And so you get that visual, and you're like, we're standing in front of a giant rock. And these are the gates of hell. And it's like, I think the cool thing that what Mike has done is he's helped really contextualize things very, very well, and understood what is going on. Because in our 21st century mind, we have over-alliterized things like that.
I think too, just because he brings the geography that's actually in the Old Testament, it actually to life, that this is this place and this is this place. And that's a great example, but he's done that with so many other places and in so many other, parts of scripture that it's the same thing. They're like, oh, that's why that's important. And that's why they're there. And that's why this genealogy is stuck in here. It's not just to make me, want to fall asleep while I'm trying to plow my way through this part of scripture that I don't want to read, but it makes every single thing actually make sense, that God didn't just forget to edit that part out. It is actually important. And like he always said, if it's strange and you don't understand why it's there, it's probably important. There's probably significance behind it. And that was a beautiful thing that I thought that he was just incredibly just gifted at.
Well, I appreciate you guys coming and sitting down and having a talk with me. We're going to keep talking, I'm sure. We'll talk more throughout the day. Glad you guys made the trip. Really appreciate it. Thanks for it. And, blessings and peace as much as can be had in a car with 5 kids in 14 hours back to Texas. But thanks for stopping and giving us a chat with us. Thanks to everybody. We'll see you next time.